Between 1950 and 1970, American grandmas competed for blue ribbons at county fairs with 30 forgotten cookies that defined an entire era of baking excellence. Cookies that won thousands of dollars at Pillsbury Bake Off and earned front-page features across the nation. Judges evaluated texture, crispness, and flavor with ruthless precision. Their recipes appeared in magazines and cookbooks nationwide. Then grocery store bakeries started selling cheap cookies in 1985, and homemade competition cookies vanished completely. Tonight, we're remembering all 30 forgotten county fair cookie champions from the 1950s to 1970s. Snappy Turtle Cookies won the 1952 Pillsbury Bake Off Grand Prize and $25,000 for Beatrice Harlib of Chicago. The cookies transformed beloved turtle candies into baked perfection, with brown sugar bases, caramel centers, and pecans topped with chocolate frosting. Judges had never tasted anything like them before. Beatrice's recipe beat 99 other finalists to claim the top prize. Her winning formula spread across America within weeks. Home bakers rushed to recreate the cookies in their own kitchens. Grocery stores reported caramel shortages across the country. Bakeries added snappy turtles to their cases immediately. Have you ever turned your favorite candy into cookies? Candy bar cookies won the 1961 Pillsbury Bake Off Grand Prize for Alice Reese of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Alice created cookies that tasted exactly like popular candy bars, but cost pennies to make at home. Her recipe combined chocolate dough with marshmallow filling and peanut topping that mimicked expensive store-bought candy. The judges awarded her the top prize and national recognition. Her recipe spread through baking circles for 3 consecutive years. Bakeries across Minnesota started making candy bar cookies. Home bakers loved that the cookies delivered candy bar flavor without the candy bar price. Alice's innovation proved homemade always beats store-bought. Have you ever made cookies that tasted like candy bars? Peanut brittle cookies won a major prize at the 1953 Pillsbury Bake Off for Mrs. John Hamlin. The cookies captured the exact flavor and crunch of peanut brittle candy in cookie form. Mrs. Hamlin mixed crushed peanut brittle directly into sugar cookie dough and topped each cookie with whole peanuts before baking. Judges had never encountered this technique before. The cookies baked into crispy, crunchy perfection, with candy pieces throughout. Home bakers across America tried recreating them immediately. The recipe became a holiday favorite in thousands of kitchens. Bakeries struggled to keep peanut brittle cookies stocked. Mrs. Hamlin turned leftover candy into competition-winning cookies. Have you ever baked crushed candy into cookie dough? Golden Nut Drops won the junior division at the 1953 Pillsbury Bake Off for 15-year-old Mary Jansen. Mary created cookies studded with 3 types of nuts and sweetened with golden corn syrup. The judges were amazed that a teenager could develop such sophisticated flavor combinations. Her recipe mixed chopped walnuts, pecans, and almonds into buttery dough enriched with corn syrup. The cookies baked into golden brown drops with crispy edges and chewy centers. Mary's story proved young bakers could compete with adults. Her mother said Mary practiced making batches every weekend for 2 months. Grocery stores faced nut shortages within weeks of her win. Have you ever won a baking contest as a teenager? Pineapple Drop Cookies won a major prize at the 1953 Pillsbury Bake Off for Mrs. D. P. Newquist. The cookies combined crushed pineapple with coconut and pecans in soft, cake-like drops. Mrs. Newquist's secret was draining the pineapple completely to prevent soggy cookies. She folded the fruit into vanilla dough with shredded coconut for tropical flavor. Judges loved the unexpected combination of textures and tastes. The cookies stayed moist for days without getting mushy or dry. Her recipe became a staple at church socials and bake sales. Bakeries added pineapple drops to their tropical cookie selections. Mrs. Newquist proved canned fruit could create blue ribbon cookies. Have you ever used canned pineapple in cookies? 5 Pillsbury Bake-Off champions complete, and each cookie won thousands of dollars when grandmas competed for glory. From turtle candies to tropical pineapple, these recipes represented baking excellence. Winners became celebrities overnight, but the next 5 state fair champions are even more impressive. Blue Ribbon Chocolate Chip Cookies won the 1948 Iowa State Fair for Mrs. Charles Estrom. Her recipe perfected the chocolate chip cookie before Toll House became famous nationwide. Mrs. Estrom used brown butter, extra vanilla, and chopped chocolate bars instead of chips. The judges had never tasted chocolate chip cookies with such depth of flavor. She beat 73 other entries to claim the blue ribbon. Bakeries started making her version and selling them under her name. Her recipe stayed legendary in Iowa for 20 years. Home bakers tried recreating her technique every Christmas. Mrs. Estrom proved perfection required brown butter and real chocolate bars. Have you ever browned butter for cookies? Ranger cookies won Best in Class at the Iowa State Fair during the 1960s for Judy Keeber's Harrison. The cookies packed oats, coconut, cornflakes, and chocolate chips into hearty drops that stayed fresh for weeks. Judy created them for her husband to take on camping trips where they wouldn't spoil. Judges loved the crunchy texture from cornflakes and chewy sweetness from coconut. The cookies became fair legends throughout the decade. Farm wives made Ranger cookies for harvest crews who needed portable energy. School lunch programs added them to cafeteria menus statewide. Every Iowa grandmother had her own version by 1970. The cookies proved breakfast cereal belonged in prize-winning baking. Have you ever added cornflakes to cookie dough? Cashew cookies won Grand Champion at the Wisconsin State Fair for Ruth Ann Stelfox. Ruth created butter cookies rolled in chopped cashews before baking until golden. The judges had never seen cookies using cashews instead of traditional pecans or walnuts. She creamed butter and sugar until fluffy, then shaped dough into crescents and rolled them in finely chopped salted cashews. The cookies baked into buttery, nutty perfection with crunchy exteriors. Ruth's recipe spread through Wisconsin baking circles within months. Bakeries sold thousands weekly using her formula. The cashew crunch and butter richness made them irresistible at every holiday gathering. Ruth proved expensive nuts created championship cookies. Have you ever used cashews in baking? Sugar cookies won Blue Ribbon at a 1950s state fair for Mrs. Walt Morenis. Her recipe created perfectly crisp edges with soft centers that stayed fresh for days. Mrs. Morenis used a combination of butter and shortening for ideal texture. She rolled the dough thin, cut perfect circles, and sprinkled coarse sugar on top before baking. Judges evaluated sugar cookies more critically than any other category because everyone claimed theirs were best. Mrs. Morenis beat 47 other entries with her superior technique. Her recipe became the gold standard that other bakers tried to match. Home bakers practiced her method for years, trying to achieve the same results. Mrs. Morenis proved simple cookies required the most skill. Have you ever won prizes for basic sugar cookies? Oatmeal cookies won ribbon at the Minnesota State Fair during the 1960s for Annette Gustafson of Maple Grove. Annette's recipe combined old-fashioned oats with brown sugar, cinnamon, and raisins in perfect proportions. She creamed the butter and sugar longer than anyone else, creating superior texture. The cookies baked into thick, chewy perfection with crispy edges. Judges praised the balance of sweetness, spice, and oat flavor. Annette's win launched her reputation as the best baker in town. She taught cookie classes at the community center for 15 years afterward. Every student wanted to learn her secret technique for perfect oatmeal cookies. Annette-proved oatmeal cookies required patience and precision. Have you ever creamed butter for 5 minutes straight? 10 blue ribbon champions complete, and every cookie won thousands of dollars when grandmas competed at state and county fairs. From Pillsbury Bake-Off winners to state fair legends, these recipes defined American baking excellence. But the next 10 county fair champions used techniques nobody teaches anymore. Snickerdoodles won blue ribbon at the Minnesota State Fair during the 1960s and became the most entered cookie in county fair competitions across America throughout the entire decade. The cookies combined simple ingredients with precise technique that separated amateur bakers from champions who understood the critical importance of cream of tartar in the dough. Judges evaluated snickerdoodles based on their characteristic crackled sugar-cinnamon coating, soft chewy centers, and tangy flavor that came from cream of tartar reacting with baking soda during baking. The winning recipe required creaming butter and sugar together for at least 5 minutes until the mixture became pale, fluffy, and increased dramatically in volume. Eggs beaten into the creamed mixture one at a time created structure and richness. Flour, cream of tartar, baking soda, and salt sifted together 3 times ensured even distribution of leavening agents that would create the signature texture. The dough chilled for exactly 30 minutes before shaping made it easier to handle and prevented spreading during baking. Each cookie needed to be rolled into a perfect 1-inch ball, then rolled thoroughly in cinnamon sugar made from coarse sugar crystals mixed with ground cinnamon. The cookies baked at exactly 375 degrees for 10 minutes until the edges set but centers remained soft and puffy. During cooling, the tops crackled beautifully as the cookies deflated slightly. Championship snickerdoodles had to demonstrate perfect tang from cream of tartar, even cinnamon distribution, soft centers with slightly crispy edges, and crackled tops covered in sparkly cinnamon sugar. By 1985, most bakers started using store-bought cookie mixes and forgot that real snickerdoodles required cream of tartar and precise technique. Have you ever used cream of tartar in cookies? Spritz cookies won blue ribbon during the 1960s for Marion's mother, whose recipe became legendary at Minnesota county fairs, where Scandinavian baking traditions dominated competition categories. The cookies required a cookie press to create intricate shapes like rosettes, Christmas trees, and wreaths that demonstrated the baker's skill and patience. Judges evaluated Spritz cookies based on uniform shape consistency, delicate buttery flavor, crisp texture that melted in your mouth, and whether the ridges and details from the press remained sharp and defined after baking. Marion's mother creamed butter and sugar until the mixture became so light and fluffy it resembled whipped cream in texture. This extensive creaming incorporated air that would create the delicate, crisp texture that defined perfect Spritz cookies. Egg yolks beaten into the creamed mixture added richness and golden color, while the whites were saved for other recipes since they would make Spritz cookies too tough and chewy. Flour sifted twice before measuring ensured the dough would be smooth enough to press through the cookie press without clogging the decorative discs. Almond extract added to the dough created the characteristic flavor that separated Spritz from ordinary butter cookies. The dough needed to be at exactly room temperature when pressed, because dough that was too cold wouldn't press through the discs smoothly, while dough that was too warm would spread during baking and lose its decorative shape. Marion's mother filled the cookie press with dough and pressed cookies directly onto ungreased baking sheets, creating perfect uniform shapes every single time. She decorated some cookies with colored sugar, some with candied cherry pieces, and left others plain to showcase the pressed designs. The cookies baked at exactly 350 degrees for 8 minutes until the edges barely started turning golden, but the centers remained pale. Overbaking would make them taste bitter instead of buttery. Championship Spritz cookies snapped cleanly when broken, melted immediately on the tongue, tasted intensely of butter and almond, and maintained crisp texture for weeks when stored in airtight containers. By 1990, cookie presses disappeared from most kitchens as bakers chose simpler drop cookies over labor-intensive pressed shapes. Have you ever used a cookie press? First place coconut macaroons won at the Wisconsin County Fair for Penny Ann Haybeck, whose recipe created the chewiest, most intensely coconut-flavored cookies judges had ever tasted in decades of county fair competitions. The cookies required only 4 ingredients, but demanded perfect technique that most home bakers couldn't master without years of practice and countless failed batches. Penny's recipe combined sweetened condensed milk, shredded coconut, vanilla extract, and egg whites into a mixture that baked into golden-topped cookies with chewy centers and slightly crispy edges. The secret to championship macaroons was whipping egg whites to exactly medium peaks before folding them into the sweetened condensed milk and coconut mixture. Egg whites beaten to soft peaks would make the cookies spread too much and turn out flat, while egg whites beaten to stiff peaks would make them dry and crumbly instead of chewy. Penny used a candy thermometer to ensure the oven temperature stayed exactly 325 degrees throughout the entire baking time. Temperature fluctuations would cause uneven browning and texture problems that judges noticed immediately. She scooped the coconut mixture using a small cookie scoop to ensure every macaroon was identical in size, which was critical for even baking and professional appearance. The macaroons needed exactly 18 minutes in the oven until the tops turned deep golden brown, while the bottoms remained pale. Underbaking left them gummy and raw-tasting, while overbaking made them hard as rocks instead of chewy. Penny's macaroons cooled on the baking sheet for 5 minutes before transferring to wire racks, which allowed them to set properly without sticking or falling apart. The finished cookies had crispy golden tops that gave way to impossibly chewy coconut centers that tasted like concentrated tropical paradise. Championship macaroons demonstrated perfect chew, intense coconut flavor, even golden browning, and ability to stay fresh for days without drying out. By 1988, most bakers used packaged macaroon mixes that produced acceptable cookies but lacked the superior texture and flavor of Penny's Blue Ribbon winners. Have you ever folded beaten egg whites into cookie dough? Molasses crinkles won blue ribbons at multiple county fairs throughout the 1960s and became the signature cookie of Midwest farm wives who baked them every autumn when molasses prices dropped after sugar beet harvests. The cookies combined dark molasses, warm spices, and brown sugar into soft, chewy drops with distinctive crackled surfaces covered in sparkling white sugar. Judges evaluated molasses crinkles based on deep molasses flavor, balanced by spices, soft texture that stayed chewy for days, dramatic crackled appearance, with dark cookies showing through white sugar coating, and intense spice aroma that filled the room. Championship molasses crinkles required using blackstrap molasses instead of mild molasses because only the darkest, most robust molasses created the intense flavor that impressed judges. The dough needed butter and shortening in equal proportions because all butter cookies would spread too much while all shortening cookies lacked flavor. Brown sugar creamed with the fats created deeper caramel notes than white sugar alone could provide. An egg beaten into the creamed mixture added structure and richness. Flour mixed with baking soda, salt, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves created the spice blend that defined molasses cookies. The baking soda would react with the acidic molasses during baking to create the characteristic crackled surface. The dough chilled overnight in the refrigerator developed deeper flavors as the spices bloomed and the molasses permeated every molecule of dough. Rolling the chilled dough into balls, then rolling each ball in white granulated sugar before baking created the dramatic contrast between dark cookies and white coating. During baking, the cookies would puff up and crack, revealing the dark molasses dough beneath the white sugar coating. Championship molasses crinkles stayed soft and chewy even 3 days after baking, which demonstrated proper technique and ingredient ratios. Spiced almond cookies won County Fair ribbon for Wanda Daly of Oregon, whose recipe combined ground almonds with warm spices in refrigerator cookies that could be sliced and baked fresh whenever needed. The cookies represented the height of 1950s convenience baking, when icebox cookies allowed busy farm wives to prepare dough in advance and bake fresh cookies in minutes for unexpected company or last-minute bake sales. Wanda's recipe creamed butter and sugar until fluffy, then beat in an egg and almond extract for intense almond flavor that complemented the ground almonds folded into the dough. Flour mixed with cinnamon, cardamom, and nutmeg created a warm spice blend that enhanced, rather than overpowered, the delicate almond taste. Ground almonds folded into the dough added texture, richness, and intensified the nutty flavor. The dough shaped into logs, wrapped tightly in wax paper, and refrigerated for at least 4 hours until firm enough to slice cleanly. Wanda could keep the logs refrigerated for up to 1 week, slicing and baking only the number of cookies needed for each occasion. She sliced the chilled dough into perfect 1/4-inch rounds using a sharp knife dipped in flour to prevent sticking. The thin cookies baked at 350 degrees for exactly 12 minutes, until the edges turned golden but the centers remained pale. Championship spiced almond cookies snapped cleanly when broken, released intense almond aroma, and delivered warm spice flavor that lingered on the tongue. Judges appreciated that icebox cookies demonstrated planning and organization skills essential for successful farm wives managing households and competitions simultaneously. By 1987, refrigerator cookie dough sold in grocery stores made homemade icebox cookies seem unnecessary and old-fashioned, despite superior flavor and texture. Have you ever made icebox cookies? Rhubarb-filled cookies won blue ribbon at the North Dakota County Fair and represented the ultimate test of a baker's ability to work with tart rhubarb filling that could turn cookies soggy if not handled with perfect technique. The cookies combined tender butter cookie dough with sweet tart rhubarb filling that had to be cooked to exactly the right consistency, thick enough to stay put inside the cookies without leaking during baking, but not so thick that it turned gummy and unpleasant. Championship rhubarb cookies required making 2 separate components with equal skill and precision. The cookie dough started with butter and sugar creamed until fluffy and pale, then an egg and vanilla beaten in until completely incorporated. Flour mixed with a pinch of salt created simple, tender dough that wouldn't overpower the filling. The dough chilled for at least 2 hours until firm enough to roll thin without sticking or tearing. Meanwhile, the filling required chopping fresh rhubarb into small pieces and cooking it with sugar and cornstarch until the mixture thickened dramatically and the rhubarb broke down completely. The filling needed to cool to room temperature before using, because hot filling would melt the butter in the dough and cause spreading during baking. The baker rolled the chilled dough thin on a floured surface and cut it into circles using a cookie cutter. Half the circles got a spoonful of cooled rhubarb filling placed precisely in the center, staying at least ½ an inch from the edges to prevent leaking. The remaining circles got small decorative cutouts in the centers to allow steam to escape during baking and create a window showing the pink rhubarb filling. Each top circle pressed carefully onto a filled bottom circle, and the edges sealed by pressing with fork tines dipped in flour to create a decorative crimped edge. The filled cookies needed to be refrigerated again for 30 minutes before baking to firm up the butter and prevent spreading. They baked at 350 degrees for exactly 15 minutes until the edges turned golden, but the tops remained pale. Championship rhubarb-filled cookies demonstrated even, tender dough, perfectly thick filling that didn't leak, secure seals that held during baking, and beautiful appearance with filling visible through the top cutout. By 1982, hardly anyone grew rhubarb anymore, and the labor-intensive process of making filled cookies couldn't compete with simple drop cookies. Have you ever made filled cookies? Cherry no-bake cookies won blue ribbon at the Michigan County Fair during the 1960s for Denise Wheeler, whose recipe created elegant cookies without turning on the oven during hot summer fair season when temperatures made baking miserable. The cookies combined crushed vanilla wafers, chopped maraschino cherries, sweetened condensed milk, and chopped pecans into a mixture that could be shaped and rolled in coconut without any baking required. Judges initially resisted no-bake cookies in competitions because they seemed like cheating compared to traditional baked entries, but Denise's cookies were so delicious and beautifully crafted that she converted skeptical judges into believers. Her recipe required crushing vanilla wafers into fine crumbs using a rolling pin and plastic bag, which created better texture than using a food processor that could turn the wafers to powder. Chopped pecans and chopped maraschino cherries folded into the vanilla wafer crumbs needed to be distributed evenly throughout the mixture. Sweetened condensed milk stirred in gradually bound everything together into a thick, sticky mixture that could be shaped with hands. Denise's secret was chilling the mixture for exactly 15 minutes before shaping, which made it firm enough to handle, but not so cold that it became impossible to work with. She scooped tablespoon-sized portions and rolled them between her palms into perfect balls, then rolled each ball in shredded coconut that stuck to the condensed milk coating. The finished cookies needed to refrigerate for at least 2 hours until they set firm enough to handle and eat without falling apart. Championship no-bake cookies demonstrated uniform size and shape, secure coconut coating that didn't fall off, proper firmness that wasn't too hard or too soft, and intense flavor from the cherries and pecans. Denise proved that cookies didn't need ovens to qualify as legitimate baking worthy of blue ribbons. By 1985, no-bake cookies became associated with easy children's recipes rather than serious competition baking, and they disappeared from adult fare categories. Have you ever made cookies without an oven? Ginger snap cookies won blue ribbon at the Kansas 4-H Fair during the 1960s and demonstrated that young bakers could master the challenging technique of creating cookies that lived up to their name by actually snapping cleanly when broken. The cookies combined dark molasses, brown sugar, butter, and a powerful blend of ground ginger, cinnamon, and cloves into dough that baked into thin, crispy cookies with intense spice flavor and satisfying crunch. Judges evaluated ginger snaps based on their snap quality when broken, deep ginger flavor balanced by other spices, even golden brown color, and ability to stay crispy for weeks without softening. Championship ginger snaps required using fresh ground ginger instead of old stale ginger that had lost its potency sitting in spice cabinets for years. The ratio of molasses to sugar was critical because too much molasses would make soft, chewy cookies instead of crisp snaps, while too little molasses would make them taste bland and boring. The butter and brown sugar creamed together until fluffy created the foundation, then an egg beaten in added structure. Molasses stirred into the mixture needed to be at room temperature because cold molasses wouldn't incorporate smoothly. Flour mixed with baking soda, salt, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves created the spice blend that would intensify during baking. The dough needed to chill for at least 1 hour until firm enough to handle without sticking. Rolling the chilled dough into small balls about 1 inch in diameter, then rolling each ball in white granulated sugar before placing on baking sheets created the characteristic crackled surface. The cookies baked at 375 degrees for exactly 10 minutes until they spread thin, crackled on top, and set firm. During cooling, they would crisp up completely and develop the snap that gave them their name. Championship ginger snaps could be broken cleanly in half with a satisfying snap sound and sharp fracture rather than bending or crumbling. By 1988, most commercial ginger snaps were too soft and chewy to actually snap, and home bakers forgot how to make the authentic crispy version. Have you ever heard cookies snap when you broke them? Sweetheart Cookies won the New Jersey County Fair 2 years in a row and became legendary for their delicate heart shapes cut from tender butter cookie dough and decorated with pink icing and red sugar crystals. The cookies represented the height of 1950s Valentine's Day baking, when homemade decorated cookies demonstrated love and devotion more meaningfully than store-bought candy ever could. The 2-year winning streak proved the baker had mastered consistent quality that judges could rely on year after year. The recipe started with butter and sugar, creamed until the mixture became so light and fluffy it nearly doubled in volume, which created the tender, melt-in-your-mouth texture that characterized championship butter cookies. An egg and vanilla beaten into the creamed mixture added richness and flavor. Flour sifted before measuring ensured accurate proportions and smooth dough without lumps. The dough needed to chill for at least 2 hours until firm enough to roll without sticking, but not so cold that it cracked when rolled. Rolling the dough to exactly 1/4-inch thickness on a floured surface ensured even baking and uniform appearance. Heart-shaped cookie cutters pressed firmly into the dough cut perfect shapes without ragged edges. The cut cookies transferred carefully to baking sheets needed to be spaced exactly 2 inches apart to prevent spreading into each other during baking. They baked at 350 degrees for 10 minutes until the edges barely started turning golden, but the centers remained pale. Overbaking would make them taste bitter instead of buttery. After cooling completely, the cookies got decorated with royal icing tinted pale pink using just a drop or two of red food coloring. The baker piped thin outlines around each heart using a small round decorating tip, then flooded the centers with thinned icing that would dry smooth and glossy. Red sugar crystals sprinkled on the wet icing added sparkle and Valentine's Day flair. Championship Sweetheart Cookies demonstrated perfect heart shapes, even thickness, tender texture, smooth icing without air bubbles, and romantic appearance worthy of expressing true love. By 1985, store-bought decorated cookies became so readily available and inexpensive that making them from scratch seemed unnecessary and old-fashioned. Have you ever decorated heart-shaped cookies? Amish sugar cookies won Best of Show at the Missouri County Fair and introduced non-Amish bakers to the simple perfection of cookies made with basic ingredients and traditional techniques passed down through generations of Amish grandmothers. The cookies combined butter, sugar, eggs, flour, baking powder, and vanilla into tender drops with slightly crispy edges and soft centers that tasted purely of butter and sugar without any distracting flavors. Championship Amish sugar cookies demonstrated that fancy ingredients and complicated techniques couldn't compete with perfect execution of fundamentals. The recipe required creaming butter and both white and brown sugar together for exactly 7 minutes by hand, using a wooden spoon, which developed superior texture compared to electric mixers that couldn't achieve the same incorporation of air. Eggs beaten into the creamed mixture one at a time created structure and richness. Vanilla extract stirred in added subtle flavor enhancement without overwhelming the pure butter-sugar taste. Flour mixed with baking powder and a pinch of salt got folded gently into the wet ingredients, using as few strokes as possible to prevent developing gluten that would make the cookies tough. The soft dough dropped by rounded teaspoonfuls onto ungreased baking sheets needed to be left in rounded mounds without flattening, because they would spread naturally during baking into perfect circles with slightly domed tops. The cookies baked at 375 degrees for exactly 12 minutes until the edges turned light golden brown, but the centers remained pale and soft. During cooling, they would firm up slightly but maintain tender texture. Championship Amish sugar cookies had to demonstrate perfect balance between crispy edges and soft centers, pure butter flavor, even golden browning, and traditional Amish simplicity that rejected modern shortcuts. The baker who won Best of Show proved that Amish baking wisdom refined over centuries produced cookies that modern recipes with exotic ingredients couldn't match. By 1990, most non-Amish bakers had abandoned hand creaming in favor of electric mixers and couldn't understand why their cookies didn't taste the same as Amish versions. Have you ever creamed butter by hand for 7 minutes? 20 blue ribbon champions complete, and every cookie represented techniques that are nearly extinct today. From rhubarb-filled perfection to Amish hand-creaming traditions, these recipes defined an era when county fairs crowned America's best bakers. The final 10 are the strangest cookies you've never heard of. Blue Ribbon Peanut Butter Cookies won at a 1950s county fair and became the gold standard against which all other peanut butter cookies were measured throughout the entire decade. The cookies combined creamy peanut butter, white sugar, brown sugar, eggs, flour, baking soda, and salt into dough that baked into cookies with crispy edges and chewy centers. Championship peanut butter cookies required understanding the critical importance of using room-temperature peanut butter and butter that would cream together smoothly without lumps or separation. The winning recipe started by creaming butter, peanut butter, and both sugars together for at least 6 minutes until the mixture became fluffy and pale. This extended creaming time separated championship cookies from ordinary ones. Eggs beaten into the creamed mixture one at a time added structure and richness. Vanilla extract stirred and enhanced the peanut butter flavor. Flour mixed with baking soda and salt got folded gently into the wet ingredients. The soft dough chilled for 30 minutes until firm enough to handle. Rolling the chilled dough into 1-inch balls required flouring your hands frequently. Each ball got placed on ungreased baking sheets and flattened with a fork dipped in flour, creating the characteristic crosshatch pattern. The fork marks served a practical purpose beyond decoration because they flattened the cookies to ensure even baking. The cookies needed to be pressed to exactly 1/2-inch thickness with deep fork impressions. They baked at 350 degrees for 12 minutes until edges set firm and turned golden, while centers remained soft. The cookies would continue baking from residual heat after removal, so taking them out when centers still looked underdone was critical. Championship peanut butter cookies cooled on the baking sheet for 5 minutes before transferring to wire racks. The finished cookies demonstrated intense peanut butter flavor, perfect balance between crispy edges and chewy centers, deep crosshatch marks, and the ability to stay fresh for days. By 1987, most bakers used commercial mixes or added chocolate chips that masked the pure peanut butter flavor. Have you ever made perfect crosshatch patterns with a fork? Gingerbread cookies won awards during the 1960s and represented the most challenging cookie in holiday baking competitions. Judges evaluated them based on dozens of criteria, including dough consistency, rolling thickness, cutting precision, baking evenness, decoration artistry, and whether the baked cookies maintained their shapes without puffing or spreading. Championship gingerbread cookies required making dough at least 1 day before baking to allow molasses and spices to permeate every molecule and develop deep flavor. The winning recipe combined butter and brown sugar, creamed until fluffy. Then dark molasses beaten in created the base. An egg added next provided structure. Flour mixed with baking soda, salt, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper created the spice blend. The black pepper added subtle heat that enhanced the ginger. The dough came together into a mass that needed brief kneading until smooth. The dough divided into flat discs, wrapped tightly, and refrigerated overnight allowed the flour to hydrate completely and flavors to develop. After the overnight rest, the dough sat at room temperature for 15 minutes before rolling. Rolling the dough to exactly 1/4-inch thickness ensured even baking. Cookie cutters pressed firmly straight down created clean edges. The cut shapes transferred carefully to parchment-lined baking sheets using a wide spatula. The cookies refrigerated again for 20 minutes before baking prevented spreading. They baked at 350 degrees for 10 minutes until edges set firm. Overbaking would make them hard as rocks instead of having slight chew. After cooling completely, the cookies got decorated with royal icing piped through small decorating tips to create faces, buttons, and trim. Championship gingerbread cookies maintained perfect shapes with no spreading, demonstrated deep gingerbread flavor with balanced spices, had tender texture with slight chew, and featured precise decoration. By 1992, most bakers bought pre-made gingerbread dough or used gingerbread house kits instead of making authentic cookies from scratch. Have you ever let cookie dough rest overnight before baking? Thumbprint cookies became a Betty Crocker classic in 1963 and won countless county fair ribbons throughout the decade. The cookies combined butter, sugar, egg yolks, vanilla, and flour into tender, shortbread-style dough that got rolled in chopped nuts before baking, then filled with jewel-toned jam. Championship thumbprint cookies required understanding the precise moment to make the indentation and the exact depth that would hold jam without making the cookie bottom too thin. The winning recipe creamed butter and sugar until fluffy and pale, then separated eggs carefully, and beat only the yolks into the creamed mixture. Vanilla and almond extract added complementary flavors. Flour folded gently into the wet ingredients created tender dough that chilled for 1 hour. Rolling the chilled dough into 1-inch balls required a light touch. Each ball got dipped first in lightly beaten egg white, then rolled in finely chopped pecans or walnuts that stuck to the egg white coating. The nut-covered balls placed on parchment-lined baking sheets needed spacing of 2 inches apart. The baker pressed her thumb gently but firmly into the center of each ball, creating a deep indentation that went almost but not quite through to the bottom. The indentation needed to be wide and deep enough to hold at least half a teaspoon of jam. The cookies baked at 350 degrees for 8 minutes, then came out for the second critical step. While still hot, the baker used the back of a small spoon to gently press the indentations again, because they puffed up slightly during baking. After repressing, the cookies went back in the oven for 7 minutes until edges turned golden. The cookies cooled completely before filling with high-quality jam in jewel tones like ruby red raspberry, deep purple grape, golden apricot, or bright strawberry. Each cookie received exactly half a teaspoon of jam, carefully spooned into the center. By 1985, most bakers used low-quality jam or made wrong indentations. Date pinwheel cookies won ribbons during the 1950s and 1960s for bakers who mastered the challenging technique of rolling dough around sticky date filling without tearing the dough or having the filling leak out during slicing. The cookies combined sugar cookie dough rolled thin with cooked date filling spread evenly across the surface, then rolled tightly into logs that got refrigerated until firm enough to slice into perfect spirals. Championship date pinwheel cookies required making two separate components with equal skill. The cookie dough started with butter and sugar creamed until fluffy, then eggs beaten in one at a time. Vanilla extract added flavor. Flour mixed with baking powder and salt created tender dough that chilled for 2 hours. Meanwhile, the date filling required chopping dates into small pieces and simmering them with sugar, water, and lemon juice until they broke down completely into thick paste. The filling cooled to room temperature before using, rolling the chilled dough on a floured surface into a rectangle exactly 12 inches by 15 inches and 1/4 inch thick required skill and patience. The cooled date filling got spread evenly across the entire surface, leaving only a 1/2 inch border along one long edge. The filling needed to be exactly the right consistency. 25 Blue Ribbon Champions complete, and every cookie represented techniques that have vanished from American kitchens. From thumbprint precision to date pinwheel rolling, these recipes demanded skills nobody teaches anymore. The final 5 are the most forgotten cookies in competition history. Coconut washboard cookies won ribbons during the 1950s and earned their peculiar name from the distinctive ridged pattern pressed into each cookie using the tines of a fork that made them resemble old-fashioned washboards used for scrubbing laundry. The dough divided into portions and shaped into logs about 2 inches in diameter required patient handling because the coconut made the dough want to fall apart. Rolling each log in additional shredded coconut created a coating that would toast during baking. The logs wrapped tightly in wax paper and refrigerated for at least 4 hours until firm enough to slice cleanly. By 1990, nobody remembered why they were called washboard cookies. Have you ever seen a real washboard? Butterscotch icebox cookies won ribbons during the 1950s and 1960s, when icebox cookies represented the height of modern convenience baking that allowed busy housewives to prepare dough in advance and bake fresh cookies whenever needed. The cookies combined butter, brown sugar, eggs, flour, and butterscotch chips into dough that was shaped into logs, refrigerated until firm, then sliced and baked into crispy cookies with intense butterscotch flavor. Championship butterscotch icebox cookies required understanding that brown sugar needed to be packed firmly when measured and free of lumps. The winning recipe started by creaming butter and firmly packed dark brown sugar together for at least 7 minutes until the mixture became incredibly fluffy. Dark brown sugar contained more molasses than light brown sugar and created deeper butterscotch flavor. An egg and vanilla beaten into the creamed mixture added richness. Butterscotch chips folded into the wet ingredients needed to be distributed evenly so every slice would contain chips. Some bakers chopped the butterscotch chips into smaller pieces so they would distribute more evenly. Flour, mixed with baking soda and salt, got folded into the butterscotch mixture, creating soft dough that needed to be shaped immediately. The dough divided into portions and shaped into logs exactly 2 inches in diameter required rolling the dough back and forth on a clean work surface until smooth and uniformly round. Logs that weren't perfectly round would produce oval cookies instead of circles. Each log wrapped tightly in wax paper and refrigerated for at least 6 hours until firm enough to slice cleanly without squashing. The baker could keep the wrapped logs refrigerated for up to 2 weeks, slicing and baking only the number of cookies needed. This convenience made icebox cookies perfect for busy farm wives. Slicing the cold logs into 1/4 inch rounds using a sharp knife produced uniform cookies that would bake evenly. They baked at 375 degrees for 10 minutes until edges set and turned darker brown while centers remained slightly soft. The cookies would crisp up completely during cooling. By 1987, refrigerated cookie dough sold in grocery stores made homemade icebox cookies seem unnecessary despite vastly inferior flavor. Have you ever kept cookie dough logs in your refrigerator? Lemon snowflake cookies won ribbons during the 1960s and 1970s for bakers who created cookies that looked like delicate snowflakes covered in powdered sugar while delivering bright lemon flavor that cut through the sweetness. The cookies combined butter, sugar, eggs, lemon zest, lemon juice, flour, and baking powder into soft dough that was rolled in powdered sugar before baking, then rolled in powdered sugar again after cooling. The winning recipe creamed butter and granulated sugar together until fluffy and pale, then beat in eggs one at a time until completely incorporated. Fresh lemon zest grated from the yellow part of lemon peel only got beaten into the creamed mixture and released essential oils. Fresh lemon juice squeezed from the zested lemons added tartness that balanced the sugar. Flour mixed with baking powder created structure that would make the cookies puff slightly during baking and develop the crackled surface characteristic of snowflake cookies. They baked at 350 degrees for 12 minutes until they spread and crackled, with the powdered sugar coating creating a beautiful crackled pattern that revealed the yellow lemon dough beneath. The edges would set and turn light golden while the centers remained soft and cake-like. During baking, the cookies puffed up and then crackled as they deflated slightly, creating the snowflake pattern. After cooling completely on wire racks, the cookies got rolled in powdered sugar a second time to build up the thick coating. Championship lemon snowflake cookies demonstrated perfect crackled snowflake pattern with yellow dough showing through white sugar, bright natural lemon flavor that tasted like fresh lemons, soft cake-like texture, and thick powdered sugar coating. By 1992, most bakers used lemon cake mix instead of fresh lemons. Have you ever grated fresh lemon zest? Frosted molasses cookies won ribbons during the 1950s in Midwest county fairs, where molasses cookies reigned supreme as the ultimate test of a baker's skill. The cookies combined butter, sugar, molasses, eggs, flour, and warm spices into soft, cake-like drops that baked into pillowy cookies, then got topped, while still warm, with brown butter frosting that soaked into the tops. Championship frosted molasses cookies required understanding that the frosting needed to be applied at exactly the right moment, when the cookies were still warm, but cool enough that they wouldn't fall apart when handled. The winning recipe creamed butter and sugar together until fluffy, then beat in an egg and dark molasses. Flour mixed with baking soda, salt, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves created the spice blend. The baking soda would react with the acidic molasses and create the soft, cake-like texture. A small amount of hot water stirred into the dough at the end made it the right consistency for dropping by spoonfuls. The soft, sticky dough couldn't be shaped or rolled, so dropping rounded tablespoons of dough onto parchment-lined baking sheets created rustic-looking cookies. They baked at 350 degrees for 12 minutes until they puffed up into soft, pillowy cookies. The cookies needed to cool on the baking sheet for exactly 5 minutes before transferring to wire racks. While the cookies cooled, the baker made brown butter frosting by melting butter in a saucepan over medium heat and cooking it while swirling constantly until it turned golden brown, and powdered sugar, vanilla, and a small amount of milk whisked in created smooth frosting. The critical timing came next, spreading the brown butter frosting on cookies that were still slightly warm but had cooled enough to handle. Frosting applied to hot cookies would melt and soak in completely. Frosting applied to completely cool cookies would sit on top without soaking in. The baker worked quickly, spreading about 1 tablespoon of frosting across the top of each cookie. By 1985, Most bakers stopped making frosted molasses cookies because timing the frosting application was too difficult. Have you ever made brown butter frosting? Sand tarts won ribbons during the 1950s as the signature cookie of Pennsylvania Dutch bakers, who had been making these delicate, crispy cookies for generations, using recipes that dated back to German ancestors. The cookies combined butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and vanilla into dough that was rolled paper-thin, cut into circles, brushed with egg white, sprinkled with cinnamon sugar and chopped almonds, then baked until golden and crispy with a texture so delicate they would shatter at the slightest pressure. Championship sand tarts required rolling the dough thinner than any other cookie, barely thicker than paper, without tearing it. The winning recipe creamed butter and sugar together for 10 minutes until the mixture became so light and fluffy it resembled whipped cream. An egg and vanilla beaten into the creamed mixture added richness. Flour sifted 3 times before measuring ensured the dough would be smooth and could be rolled incredibly thin without tearing. The soft dough needed to chill for at least 3 hours until firm enough to roll without sticking. Rolling the chilled dough required a light touch, plenty of flour on the work surface and rolling pin, and patience to achieve the paper-thin consistency. The dough needed to be so thin you could almost see through it when held up to light. Cookie cutters pressed gently into the thin dough, cut perfect circles that got transferred carefully to parchment-lined baking sheets using a wide spatula, because the dough was so fragile it would tear if handled roughly. Each circle got brushed lightly with beaten egg white that would create a glossy finish and help the topping adhere. Then finely chopped almonds, scattered on top, added crunch and nutty flavor. The cookies needed to be topped sparingly because too much topping would weigh them down. They baked at 375 degrees for only 8 minutes until the edges turned golden brown. The incredibly thin cookies crisped up completely during cooling and became so delicate they would shatter when you bit into them. Championship sand tarts demonstrated paper-thin consistency throughout, even golden browning, delicate crispy texture that shattered when eaten, and perfect balance of cinnamon and almond topping. By 1988, nobody had patience to roll dough paper-thin anymore. Have you ever rolled dough thin enough to see through? Russian tea cakes won ribbons during the 1950s and appeared at every holiday cookie exchange under multiple names including Mexican wedding cookies, snowballs, and butterballs. The cookies combined butter, powdered sugar, flour, finely chopped pecans or walnuts, and vanilla into tender, crumbly shortbread balls rolled in powdered sugar while still warm, then rolled again after cooling. Championship Russian tea cakes required understanding that the ratio of butter to flour was critical, because too much butter would make cookies that spread and became greasy, while too little butter would make them dry. The winning recipe started by creaming butter and powdered sugar together until the mixture became incredibly light and nearly white. Vanilla extract beaten into the creamed mixture added essential flavor. Finely chopped nuts stirred into the butter mixture needed to be chopped into pieces no larger than rice grains. Flour folded gently into the nut butter mixture came together into soft dough that chilled for 30 minutes. Rolling the chilled dough into balls about 1 inch in diameter required a light touch. The balls placed on ungreased baking sheets needed spacing of only 1 inch apart because they didn't spread during baking. They baked at 325 degrees for 18 minutes until bottoms turned light golden, but tops remained pale. The critical technique came next, rolling them in powdered sugar at exactly the right temperature. The cookies needed to cool on the baking sheet for exactly 3 minutes after coming out of the oven until cool enough to handle but still warm enough that butter would absorb powdered sugar. Championship Russian tea cakes demonstrated perfectly round shape with no spreading, tender, crumbly texture that melted immediately, intense buttery flavor enhanced by nuts, and thick powdered sugar coating that didn't fall off. By 1988, most commercial versions were too dry. Have you ever rolled cookies in powdered sugar twice? These 30 forgotten county fair cookies, from snappy turtle cookies to sand tarts, won blue ribbons when American grandmas competed for glory at state and county fairs between 1950 and 1970. Each recipe represented the absolute peak of home baking skill during an era when women spent entire days preparing one perfect batch of cookies for competition. Pillsbury Bake-Off winners earned $25,000 and national fame. State fair champions got their recipes into cookbooks that sold millions of copies. County fair blue ribbon winners became local legends whose cookie techniques were studied and copied by every baker in town. These cookies defined American baking excellence for 2 full decades. Judges evaluated them with ruthless precision, looking for perfect texture, ideal flavor balance, superior appearance, and flawless technique. Winners demonstrated mastery of skills that took years to develop, creaming butter by hand for 10 minutes, rolling dough paper thin without tearing, timing frosting application to the exact second, and creating crosshatch patterns that remained perfect after baking. By 1990, county fair cookie competitions had declined dramatically. If your grandma won blue ribbons at county fairs, share this video before these recipes disappear forever. Subscribe now so you never miss another forgotten recipe from America's baking past. Comment below which blue ribbon cookie you'll attempt first. The clock is ticking on these disappearing traditions.